Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's a very important day for us to have a friend of All Saints Church and a personal friend of mine return to this podium to tell us about what's going on in his life and also in his struggle. Arik Asherman grew up in the U.S., I think in Erie, Pennsylvania, and made his Aliyah to Israel and took with him a heart and a vision for passion and peace and inclusion and justice. And he is one of the visionary and courageous leaders in Israel-Palestine today. He is not universally applauded because of his stances. He has more of the audience that the 8th century prophets and Jesus had. Folks who have a little enlightenment and know how important it is to stand now for the long-term vision of God for all people, to be gathered together with safety and dignity for all. I could go on and on. I do want to mention how graciously he received me in 2002 when I was on my sabbatical and gave me a full morning in his office, gave me a sense of what was going on in Israel-Palestine, really opened my eyes to some of the injustices that so many people live with and how oppression tears at the soul of those who are perpetrators as well as victims. Before I do turn over the microphone to him, I want to thank there's several interfaith peacemaking organizations represented here today, from Fuller Seminary and the Just Peacemaking arm there. Also, I'm very, very happy that the Abrahamic Faiths Peacemaking Initiative, which is a part of All Saints Ministry, is here, and we have developed over the course of our being together an amazing curriculum called For One Great Peace, an Interfaith Study Guide, and we have copies of that at the table here. I certainly want you to stop by, and I'm sure Arik will talk about this also, but I want you to stop by the table and pick up a lot of offerings from him so that you can really find out what really is going on. And they're donation envelopes, and I heartily support your making a healthy donation through those to Arik and the Organization for Human Rights, the Rabbis for Human Rights that he leads. But without further ado, will you please warmly welcome Rabbi Arik Asherman. Welcome, brother. Yes, that's you.
Hello?
Yes.
Great. Okay. It's so wonderful to be back. I think this is my third time here at All Saints and second time right in this room, and so it really is nice to be back. I hope it's okay if I'm standing down here as opposed to being sequestered behind the... I know that's not a good word these days. Behind the podium. But hopefully everybody can hear and see. So since we don't have a lot of time, and I want to leave a lot of time for discussion and dialogue, I'm going to just give a few opening remarks. But first of all, as I always try to do so I can gauge who I'm speaking with, how many people here are in some way familiar with Rabbis for Human Rights? Okay, so a lot of people who aren't. Okay. How many people have heard me speak before? Okay. All right. So I'm going to do three things in about 3 minutes. Whatever. I'm going to try to give you, those of you who are not familiar with Rabbis for Human Rights, it's just a thumbnail sketch of who we are. I'm going to offer some thoughts from our Jewish tradition and give a very, very brief touch on some of what I think are some of the hot and important issues that we're dealing with at the moment, and leave it to you all to ask questions and fill some of that in. So, Rabbis for Human Rights, in 2008, we in in Israel celebrated our which anniversary? 60th. A time of great celebration for us as Israelis. a time to give thanks for the fact that after 2,000 years of oppression, because we've been homeless, that we now had some control again over our destiny. And we know, of course, that for others, what is a cause for great celebration for us as Israelis is the Nakba, the great disaster. And since I don't have time for my usual 5-hour talk, I can cut it down simply by saying that our goal is to bring a little bit closer to fruition that promise that God makes time after time in the book of Genesis, that through you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. If today we have a zero-sum game, we want to get to a win-win situation, and what is a blessing for us is a blessing shared by all. On the occasion of that anniversary, we issued a series of radio ads, each starting with a piece of David Ben-Gurion's reading out, the original recording of him reading out our Declaration of Independence. In the first, you hear him say that the country will be mushtetet, the very basis of our existence as a country will be cherut, tzedek, v'shalom, freedom, justice, and peace, as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. And in the second, you hear him say that the country will be guaranteed total social and political equality for all, regardless of religion, nationality, or gender. And our ads went on to say, we had this vision 60, now 64 years ago. We had this dream, not what everybody else wanted, what we wanted for ourselves. What we were dreaming we were coming here to do. The country that we envisioned that we were building. Where have we succeeded? And where have we not yet succeeded? 60 or even 64 years is not a long time as countries go. But when we're being honest with ourselves, certainly in the field of human rights, we have to be honest and say we haven't lived up to our own dream, what we thought we were coming to do. Rabbis for Human Rights tries to make that dream a little bit more of a reality. And we do that. We are the only rabbinic organization in Israel explicitly dedicated to human rights, the only one in which Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, and Renewal rabbis all coexist in one organization without strangling each other. And I know that there's no sectarian issues in Christianity, but for us this is a big deal. We are Israel's rabbinic voice of conscience. We've received the Speaker of the Knesset's prize for our contributions to Israeli society. We've been endorsed in this country by the rabbinic bodies of the Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, and Renewal movements. On principle, we're always involved in at least one issue dealing with the human rights of Jewish Israelis, and at least one issue dealing with the human rights of non-Jews who are part of our society or under our control. We deal with education about Judaism and human rights with the Army, with youth taking off in a gap year between high school and the Army, with university students and many other groups. We believe that education, or that economic justice is a human right. Nothing that I have to convince anybody of here, but while we're familiar with the deep poverty among Palestinians, you may not know that among Israelis, some 20% of Israelis are elderly or chronically hungry, choosing every day between medicine and food. Some 25% of children and youth go to bed hungry every night. Somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of Israeli are living under the poverty line for many reasons, but among them, something, again, not such a great revelation here, but as we often take the best of American society, we've been in a transition from a social welfare economy to a neoliberal economy in which there is no room for public housing and you create Wisconsin-type plans to punish, not try to fight unemployment, but to try to fight the unemployed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and that's a big piece of what we do. We deal with the so-called unrecognized villages of the Bedouin villages in the Negev, which I'll say a little bit more about in a few seconds. African refugees who have made their way to Israel. And we're, of course, most famous or infamous for the work that we do on behalf of Palestinian human rights. Our big issues are opposition to administrative demolitions, the Catch-22 policy in which you make it impossible through building and zoning laws to make it possible to build legally, or almost impossible. And then you punish people who have to build without a permit by demolishing their homes. We've had great success, including a major high court victory, so that if in 2002, Palestinians and those of us trying to protect them by acting as human shields when farmers were trying to get to their olive groves, as a result of our work, acting as human shields, then engaging and speaking with the security forces and eventually going to our high court. Today, many Palestinian farmers are getting to lands they couldn't get to for 2, 5, 10, even 15 years because the court ordered that it's the army's obligation to make sure that Palestinians get to every single olive grove and protect them while doing so. So believe it or not, if you come to Israel in Palestine during the olive harvest or the plowing season, which is right now, you will actually see the Israeli army protecting Palestinian farmers to get to their land. So that's a real quick introduction to who we are. And now I want to give some thoughts. Now, if I had really done my homework, I would have found out what the Jewish Bible reading in the Episcopalian tradition is for today. What? The burning bush. Okay, well, we were close. Our reading for this last week, including yesterday, was just a little bit further in Exodus, which is the story of the golden calf. And I think that the story of the golden calf is a tremendously instructive teaching when we're thinking about human rights work. We want our religion to be celebratory. We come here to be inspired. We come here to feel joy. And yet we know that if religion has any meaning, it also has to teach us to deal with the difficult times in our lives and with disappointment, including with disappointment with our fellow human beings, and in my case, our fellow Israelis. What does Moses do when he first finds out from God that the children of Israel have built the board? He doesn't want to believe it. The first thing he wants to do is stick his head in the sand. Then he comes down and he sees that it's real. And when he does that, he acts decisively in chastisement, even harshly, might say, because he realizes he has a responsibility to speak the truth and say that what has happened here is wrong. But the story doesn't end there. There's a second chance. In chapter 34, God wants to destroy the people. Start all over again. Moses argues, saves his people, and receives that second chance, the second set of tablets. Now, when I, as an Israeli, as a Jew, as a rabbi, as a Zionist, am confronted with the deepest, darkest corners of the country that I love, that I've chosen to live in, it's not fun. I often feel like I'm the man who knows too much. I'd be a happier person if I did not know some of the things that I know are happening in the country that I love. But when you're confronted knowing that things are happening that you do not want to believe are happening, and I don't distinguish right now between what's happening in the occupied territories or inside Israel. For us, the single-parent mom opening up the empty refrigerator is just as much a human rights issue as the Palestinians that we're trying to assist. But you have a choice. You can do what Moses wanted to do at the beginning, to stick your head in the sand, say it's not happening. And you could also let that disappointment, and when you deal with it every day, it becomes a bellyful. And when you realize how much pain and suffering is happening, you can go to the opposite extreme. This is a terrible, racist, apartheid place. I want nothing to do with it. It ain't me, babe. It's not me. It's not my people. I want nothing to do with it. But for me, it is. It is my people. And it is my country. And so, Even if we're tempted, like Moses perhaps was tempted just to agree with God, that just start all over. It's not an option. And when I'm honest, I also know that for all the deepest, darkest things that I deal with on a daily basis, Israel is far from the worst human rights violator in the world. There are places in this world, and we all know it, that if I were to come and speak here as I am today and go home, it would be a death sentence. I live in a democracy where I have the ability to work for justice, using a free court system, a free press, and everything else. And so the third alternative is to take that pain that I and many of us are feeling, to let it push us forward, to do what we call tikkun olam, which some of you call co-creationism, this idea that we have to be God's partners in the ongoing work of creation, in sanctifying the world, in repairing the world, in bringing the world a little bit closer to the one that God envisions for us and the one that we envisioned in our own Declaration of Independence. And now I'm going to reveal something that I don't think I've revealed on any of my previous visits here. It's a deep, dark secret of mine. But believe it or not, when I was in high school, I played high school football. Now, to say that I played high school football is a bit of an exaggeration. In 3 years of varsity football and also ninth grade, whatever, but in those 3 years, I maybe was in the game for 3 plays, okay? I was never going to be much of a football player. Now, our coach, and he was a winning coach, we had a record-setting winning streak, unbeaten streak. He was Verbrent. You know a little bit of Yiddish, okay? He was a Schreier. He would scream. He would exhort. He would literally foam at the mouth. But he would always say, I only scream at the people I can make into better football players. In 3 years, he never screamed at me once. Right? There was nothing that this amazing coach could have possibly have done to have made me into a good football player. So what's my point? When we choose that third path, that painful path of letting the pain that we're feeling push us to be a part of the solution, yes, there are people that say we are anti-Israel, we are traitorous, and we get the threats and what have you, and certainly people that live here have to have a little bit of humbleness, not being there and sharing the same kind of risks that we share. But what we do is actually the deepest possible act of faith. Because just like my football coach, Coach Beswick, if we didn't, in a very deep and real place, believe in the goodness of our fellow Israelis, in the possibility of change, in the goodness of our partners on the Palestinian side, there'd be no point. It would be a waste of breath. And so when we protest and go to a court and write in the newspaper and act as human shields and do civil disobedience sometimes and whatever else we do, it is an act of faith based on the teaching in the Jewish tradition, which we see certainly time and again in the book of Genesis, that people are basically good, people can change, people can recalibrate to achieve our highest and truest selves. Even the word in Hebrew for sin, chet, is actually an archery term. We were trying to hit the mark and we just missed it by a bit. But our intentions were good. And so, for all as easy it is to become so cynical, so angry, dealing with oppression, injustice, and everything that we deal with on a daily basis, is essential that we keep that place of faith, believing in the goodness of our fellow human beings and of our fellow Israelis. So let me just touch on a few of the crucial issues that we're going to be dealing with, that we are dealing with now, that we're going to be dealing with in the near future. I'm going to concentrate on issues dealing with Palestinians because I know that's, I think, what most people here are interested in hearing. But during questions and answer, I'm obviously more than happy to talk about the socioeconomic issues that we deal with inside Israel with our fellow Israelis. The first, I mentioned the unrecognized villages. Well, what is an unrecognized village? These are Bedouin, mostly Bedouin villages, mostly in the Negev. They're not all in the Negev, they're not all Bedouin, but that's what most of what we're talking about. These are villages inside Israel. These are Israeli citizens. Many Bedouins serve in the army. But because of the fact that their communities, they were just never on the map from the time that Israel was created, although most of them are older than Israel. Or they're in places that when there was a military government inside Israel until, for Israeli Arabs, Israeli Palestinians until 1966, they were where they were told to move to. Because they're not on the map, they don't get any services, they don't get any schools, water, what have you. Constantly, their homes are demolished, their crops are sprayed. Right now, we've been going through the last few weeks where the government's been out every day uprooting everything that they planted. And 7 artificial cities have been created to attempt to move people into these cities that have become magnets for crime, poverty, drugs, despair. And right now, we're dealing with something called the Begin Report, or recommendations, which, if they are followed, could lead to the forced expulsion of another 40,000 Bedouin from their homes into these cities. Basically, a few years ago, there was something called the Goldberg Committee. We were all surprised when this committee came up with not maybe the recommendations that we would come up with, but pretty good. They actually spoke with Bedouin, and he said that the solution to the Bedouin issues had to be based on the existing communities. The government didn't like that too much, so what do? You create a committee on the committee. And the Prover Committee came up with much harsher recommendations that would lead to some 40,000 Bedouin being expelled. The Bedouin didn't like it. We didn't like it. Believe it or not, the right wing didn't like it either because this was too soft on the Bedouin. And so then they brought in Benny Begin, a minister with that portfolio, and he just recently had the government approve a report that was kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It spoke with the understanding language of Goldberg, but ended up with the same recommendations as Prover. And in the next government, if we actually end up having a government, that's going to be on the agenda. Another thing that's going to be on the agenda is, of course, some really important issues in the South Hebron Hills. Back in 2000, after in 1999, 700 men, women, and children were expelled from the cave communities that they call home in the South Hebron Hills. We were part of an effort to get them home successfully. Now there's a renewed effort to expel many of them from their homes. And our particular piece of it is we have an amazing legal team that has returned many people to their homes, to their lands. But now we're saying it's not enough just to make sure that they're not expelled, because the draconian status quo that's been in place even after we got people home has meant that they can't build a thing without getting even worse than anybody else in the occupied territories without it being demolished. And we're suing for proper development. We also have an overall high court case, which is a Guinness Book of World Records for the longest high court case in the making. We've been working on it since 2004, which is going and is now, it's been twice postponed, but is supposed to be heard in October, with a very radical idea that planning in Palestinian communities in Area C should be returned to Palestinian hands. That's our goal. We're also dealing with the village of Susia. There's amazing, Susia is a village people that lived just on the border, on the Israeli side of what became the border in 1948, were forced to move into their lands and with their families on the other side of the border, came under Israeli occupation again, and they were expelled from their homes in 1986 because where their village was, it was discovered an ancient synagogue. That's important to realize that some people want to deny on the Palestinian side, want to deny that we Jews have roots in the land of Israel. We do too. That synagogue is thousands of years old. But these people were expelled from their homes because of that synagogue, went out into their fields, living in caves again, but with no possibility of getting any zoning rights, planning rights. They've been under threat, and now there's a group called Regavim, a wonderful right-wing outfit that claims reverse discrimination against settlers in order to try to argue that the army must do, before the court should order the army to demolish more homes than it's already demolishing. They almost always lose, but they win when they lose because the defense of the army is we're okay because we are demolishing homes. And where's the third by saying, guys, why are you demolishing it all? Okay? And so we're hoping that now that we're going to be able to be that third voice, that the settlers and Regavim will rue the day that they went after some of our clients. They did it because of all the successes that we've had in returning lands and what have you to Palestinians in that area, and they wanted to counterattack. Now this brings me, and this is, I think, just the last thing I want to bring up to leave us at least 15 minutes to, or so, 10, 15 minutes to dialogue. I've been thinking a lot recently about what are some of the things that are the essence of human rights work. Now, one of our medieval commentators on the Torah was a man by the name of Ibn Ezra. Now, he comments quite at length on the many times that commandments of how we're supposed to treat the stranger appear in the Torah. For a gold-plated matzo ball, does anybody know here how many times commandments about the stranger and how we treat the stranger appear in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible? Sorry? Lots. 36. It's the most often repeated commandment, which means that God knew that this was going to be one of the most difficult to obey. And Ibn Ezra's commentary on the command that appears several times not to oppress the stranger is that this is a warning specifically to judges. He says the following: when a judge makes a mistake and wrongs someone from the dominant, the powerful groups in society, they know how to shout, they know how to appeal, they know how to make their pain felt, they know how to argue. But if you are a member of the weaker, less powerful parts of society, there's actually 2 different versions of the text. One says that the stranger, the widow, the orphan have no oz, no strength. Some versions add a resh, so it says no ozer, no helper. And this is part of the essence of human rights work. First of all, that we have to be that ozer sometimes. And I was actually inside Israel working with people in public housing, and one woman said, we have a rabbi in Beit Sha'an working to help people in public housing, and he says, and she said, and the people in the public housing company were shouting at me, why are you working with that rabbi who's just creating provocations? Because we realized that 90% of their problems were just because they were one little guy or woman standing against a big bureaucracy. And when you have that ozer, when you have someone standing with you, is a different story. In Susia, we were down with a diplomatic mission, and the spokesperson, Nasser Nawaje, said something that just blew me away. He said, in 1986, when they came to demolish our homes, there's nothing we could do because we were all alone. We're in trouble again. We're in great danger. But the difference is we're not alone anymore. It's not enough. We have to win. But it's a start. It's an important start. But it's also not enough because we can't just be the white knights in shining armor coming to save the poor natives. So it's also about oaths, empowerment. And the fact that whether we're trying to work as partners with Palestinians, maybe even junior partners when we're working in Palestine, to the fact that we try to empower indigent Israelis, it's not only about the oaths that we have, but the oaths that we have to find a way of sharing with the people that we're working with. And that's part of human rights work as well. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch went one step further, and he has a commentary on, well, let me ask you this. For another gold-plated matzo ball, how many Palestinians do you think are on the army planning committees that do the zoning and planning for Palestinians? How many Palestinians are in the Knesset making the laws? How many Palestinians are judges in the courts that judge them? 0. Okay? Maybe some of you have heard of the Edmund Levy Commission, a commission that was just formed because Netanyahu and the government had a problem. The court said they had to remove different settlement buildings and a couple high-profile cases, evacuate settlers, and they didn't like it. They were coming under a lot of pressure from the right wing not to do that. And he did it in the end, but he created a commission with a high court retired judge to come up with a way of making the treif kosher, all right, of finding a way of deciding that even on the land which the government itself recognizes is private Palestinian land, the government recognizes that 21% of the settlements are built on private Palestinian land, and the number is much higher, but that's what the government at least recognizes. And he came up with a job. He did his job. He came up with a legal, quote-unquote, rationale. How many Palestinians were on that committee? 0, of course. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says the following. He's talking about the commands for leket and peah, the commandments that we leave the corners of our field and fallen sheaves to be gleaned by the poor. And he says, why does the Torah have to get into this? Why can't you just leave to the goodness of the hearts of the landowners to figure out how to be just with the people that don't have any land? Okay, you got it. And he says the following. He says, when you allow the people with power and property to take on the white man's burden of deciding how to be just to those that have no voice, that have no power, that have no oz, that have no ozer, he says, it govel im pesha. It borders on criminality. It's almost always going to end badly. Even if people have the best of intentions. And that's why he says there has to be some law, higher law. And you can't just leave it in the hands of the people that have the power. So that's my final thought, to leave a few minutes at least for questions, thoughts, arguments, discussion, what have you, about what I think our Jewish tradition teaches us about some of the essential principles that have to guide human rights work, whether it be in Israel, Palestine, or anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. For your work to be effective, it seems to me you need a partner. I think you yourself said that. And the question I guess I have is, are there partners on the Palestinian side that are significant and working with you and in some measurable numbers, or are you kind of whistling a little bit in the dark?
Thank you. Before I answer that, we do have at the back sign-up sheets, and maybe even we can pass them around. Anyone that would like to stay in touch with us. And it's not just about the fundraising, although we do need this financial help, particularly this year as we've split from our North American affiliate. But it's also about being with us when we write letter campaigns and these kinds of stuff. And so if we have a name, address, and email, and if you're a glutton for punishment, put an asterisk next to your name, and you'll get a weekly human rights sermon and sometimes other kinds of updates. So in terms of your question, we have some amazing Palestinian partners. We used in early years to work more with Palestinian NGOs. Today we're more working with people at the local level, with local government, with farmers, and what have you, and those are our primary partners on most of what we do. I don't know if this is what you were asking as well, but we also have people that get it, that understand about Israeli human rights. It's not a simple thing when you're on the short end of the stick, and yet some amazing people who tell us that how important it is that their fellow Palestinians see positive role models of Israelis and Palestinians working together nonviolently for change and having some success to give people the idea that it's possible. Okay, and as I've said before, sometimes I think if our first mandate is to prevent or redress human rights abuses, and our second is to educate our fellow Israelis about a different way of understanding Torah, then our third is breaking down stereotypes that Palestinians have about Israelis. And only I as an Israeli can do that. Only I as an Israeli can empower the Palestinian parent that says, my son has just seen his home demolished in front of his eyes. He's just seen his parents humiliated in front of his eyes. What do I say when my 10-year-old child says, I want to grow up and be a terrorist? We want them to know that not every Israeli comes with guns to demolish homes, that there are Israelis that come to stand shoulder to shoulder with us to rebuild our homes. And so if we're really concerned about stereotypes and propaganda in Palestinian society about Israelis, then what are we doing to empower that Palestinian parent that wants their child to know something else? And that's why I think that what we're doing, and of course I need Palestinians to empower me. But the fact is that that's one of the reasons that I think that we're doing is not only the just and right and Jewish thing to do, it's a self-interested thing to do. It's the best way I can protect my children if I've had bombs go off not far from my home. And it's the best thing that I can do. It's a real Zionism today as far as I'm concerned.
Dr. Reza Aslan of USC in this hall last year said, I have been a passionate advocate of a two-state solution until today. Mm-hmm. Today I'm changing my position because of the intransigence of Jewish settlements in the West Bank, and from today I argue for a one-state solution. What would be your response to him?
Rabbis for Human Rights has no position on where the borders should be, or a 1 or a 2 or a 10-state solution. It's beyond our mandate as a human rights organization. We leave that for the politicians. We do say the occupation must end, but just what it will look like, that's not in our mandate. Personally, I also believe, I do think that the possibility of a two-state solution is diminishing day by day. I don't think it's impossible, but also as an individual, I think process is more important. There are many possible outcomes, any of which I'd be prepared to accept if Palestinians and Israelis would agree. I used to say that Palestinians and Israelis, if we should live on the moon together if it was a joint agreement. And so I'm really, I'm more concerned. I don't think that we have to, in this room or anywhere else, decide what solutions are possible or not. I think what we have to do is work for a process that will let Israelis and Palestinians come to some kind of joint agreement.
When you talk about the biblical texts about the treatment of strangers, has it ever occurred to you that the people that you are speaking for are the strangers in the Arabs' land? I mean, you guys came over the last 100 years as the strangers with the military power to take the land, and now you've got it. Right. You're the strangers.
Okay. Great question.
And the problem is you guys covet. Right. It wasn't enough to get 70%. There's a sizable minority who want 100% and are trying to make it so miserable they hope that the Arabs self-deport.
It's a great question, and what I should have said is I think there's a huge problem with I agree with you that there's a problem in talking about Palestinians as the strangers when they've been living there for centuries and centuries and centuries. Personally, I believe that a more appropriate term would be re'ah, usually translated neighbor, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. It means someone who's like you, and I think we have the spiritual ability to see that Palestinians in a very essential way in their humanity are like us. We are the same in that way. Another thing in last week's Torah portion is that the high priest has the breastplate that he wears in going into the Holy of Holies. There are 12 different stones for each tribe, each stone, but each different. And in all of our commonality and differences, they had to be next to the heart of the high priest when he went into that most holy of spaces. I think we have to do that as well. Where I would probably disagree with you if I understand where you're coming from, and I know that we won't be able to fully flesh this out now, but we can talk about it afterwards, is I do reject the idea that we're the strangers any more than the Palestinians. In the same way that I, my fellow Israelis, have to accept that Palestinians have deep roots in that land and are not strangers, we are not colonialists coming back to take over. We are coming home. And the fact that we're exercising our right of return from 2,000 years ago, or we're talking about Palestinian right of return from 60 years ago, doesn't make a difference. And I really wish that people advocating for Palestinian rights would, in the same way that I and my fellow Israelis have to be prepared to grant and recognize that Palestinians have right to everything that I want for myself, Palestinians and those who support Palestinians have to recognize the same for us. And at some point, we should get beyond Israelis and Palestinians and talk about human beings. Okay.
This will be our last question.
Thanks so very much. My students and I are so impressed that the Palestinian Authority and the folks on the ground on the West Bank, not Hamas, but on the West Bank, are committed to a nonviolent strategy now and building their economy and education and stuff. Does this news spread in Israel in a way that can counter the narrative that we have no partner for peace among the Palestinians?
Perhaps. One of the challenges is there are two ways that, for all the ways we can't talk about symmetry between Israelis and Palestinians, when we have so much Israelis, so much more political, economic, military power. And by the way, again, if we can send a couple of those sheets around, in addition to people going out that want to sign up, but there are two ways that we are incredibly, incredibly parallel. The first is we all so deeply feel ourselves to be the victims that we are outraged. We are furious if anyone says we're victimizers. Not realizing you can be a victim and a victimizer at the same time. A late 19th, early 20th century Rabbi Tamarat, in his commentary on why the children of Israel had to stay in their homes when the angel of death went through Egypt, was because he said, even when your cause is just, any cause with violence corrupts, and the difference between being a victim and a victimizer is less than a hairbreadth. The second way that we are incredibly parallel is that poll after poll shows that there's a sane majority of Israelis and Palestinians who want a compromise, negotiated agreement, and even a larger percentage on both sides that say, we want peace, they don't. Again, that's why it's so essential to break down those stereotypes, but that is the reality. And the demagogues do everything possible to tell our fellow Israelis that there's no partner for peace. The fact that we've ignored the Arab League peace proposal for 10 years or so. If I really want to jumpstart peace in the same way that polls showed an overwhelming majority of Israelis opposed to the very same things they supported after Sadat came to Jerusalem and spoke to the Israeli people from the Knesset, I would try to get the Arab League to say, people from the Arab League say, you've been ignoring us for 10 years, enough is enough, we're coming to Jerusalem next week, we're going to end this, no more screwing around. And I think that in the same way that opinion polls changed overnight, it would happen again when the demagogues could no longer pull the wool over the eyes and say there's no partner for peace.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all.